brothers and sisters, all throughout the Lenten season, we've been holding devotions on Wednesday evenings where I interact with those who come to meditate along with me. And when I do that, I usually have a thought that kind of binds all the meditations together, and this year it was predictable texts. We talked about various prophecies that were fulfilled during Jesus' life and passion and death, and asked the question, since you can see this was predicted in the Old Testament, let's answer for ourselves, is that because there's something about it that's predictable, given our nature and the way things flow, or is it just that God sees all things, which He certainly does, and therefore He can write stuff out in advance? And it was interesting to consider questions like that. For instance, if somebody had predicted that the King of the Jews, the Messiah they long waited for, would come into Jerusalem on a humble donkey that had never been ridden before. And people could say, yes, it's absolutely predictable, not just because God can see in advance, but because wars don't solve things in the end. You need somebody who's a peace king. And they don't ride war steeds for that, they ride donkeys. Then you could say, not really predictable though, because the people of the Jews had not really looked at that passage and made the connection. As far as we can tell, we have a lot of literature from that time. They hadn't made that connection. It didn't make a lot of sense to them. God can predict it, maybe we can't. Is it predictable, another example, is that Jesus was betrayed by a friend? You might say, not that predictable, because it's the King of the Jews. Who would imagine that the King of the Jews would have somebody among his closest followers who would be disloyal to him, right? Then again, if you ask the question, is it predictable that people are betrayed in this world by those close to them? Well then, if he's standing in our place, he almost has to be betrayed. Those are all interesting questions. But what I want to impress upon you tonight is how much we need predictable. You know this from life. You've all been around kids. You know how important it is for them to have some predictability, right? They got to have some routine. It's necessary for their development. Big upsets in their routine end up being wounds from which they need to heal later in life, emotional wounds. And you might say, good thing I've grown up past that, but don't tell me you don't have your routines. You like your predictability too, right? We need predictable. The church needs predictable. Sometimes people ask why there are so many churches that have this kind of predictable flow of worship, because sometimes, you go around and check out other churches, some of them are purposely trying to avoid that. They're trying to do something new all the time. So they'll say to me, Pastor, why do this old stuff over and over again? And I say, well, I wondered that too when I was young, and then I became a pastor and I started seeing people in the hospital, seeing them close to death and realizing how much that predictability sustained them in those dying moments. They could remember hardly anything in their lives. But I had a man who was lying on his deathbed, and they said, his brain is shutting down. He probably won't respond to you today, Pastor. His whole family is standing around him in this hospital room. And I read him Psalm 23, and then say the Lord's Prayer. He started breathing faster during Psalm 23. He'd heard it so many times before. And then this nearly brain-dead man started reciting the Lord's Prayer. And then launched into, I can't even tell you, it was an impromptu poem based on Psalm 23 and the Lord's Prayer. It's absolutely stunning. We need predictable. We absolutely need it. We also need some change, I'll give you that. We also need a base. We need something we can predict. A lot of people say that the church is anti-scientific, and they forget that the church was actually a sponsor of science back in the day, before the Enlightenment. Still is today to some degree, but those two disciplines have departed ways because of popular understanding of the two. But the church always said, in regards to scientific discovery, God is a God of order. So even when they got into arguments with somebody like Copernicus, that those are unfortunate things that the church did during those days, but they also raised Copernicus. Copernicus, in his writing, thank God for being a God of order through which he could come up with theories, theorems, and predictions. We need predictable. And Good Friday is about that. Good Friday is about how predictable God is. For all the things that are crazy in your life, for all the things that have gone crazy in our world, God has not changed. Here's something predictable. God acts in love. I can demonstrate that from the very first moment that mankind first fell into sin. Because he gave them life, he gave them a beautiful world, and he gave them options. And he loved them enough to let them exercise their options. I wish they'd made different choices. But then when they rebelled, he didn't show up in lightning and thunder. It wasn't like the storm we had earlier. He walked gently into the garden. He called out, "Where are you?" like he didn't know. He had a conversation with them and then promised them that through the seed of Eve, this nightmare would one day end. He acted in love. There's something else that's predictable about God. Perfectly faithful. When he promises something, he gets it done. He always does what he says. That's predictability we need. He did, in fact, send a descendant of Eve who did keep that promise. That's what Good Friday's about, right? Good Friday's about predictable that we need. Here's something else that's predictable. Take any ring in which you might hold a fight. Take any opponent you can imagine, put him in one corner, then put God in the other. The outcome is predictable, isn't it? And Good Friday's about that. We may not have been able to predict quite what happened on Good Friday. Even after reading Isaiah 53, like we read earlier, even after reading Psalm 22, like we read last night on Maundy Thursday, so many things pointed to exactly what happened on that day, and yet it took everybody by surprise. That's why the candles keep going out, right? The disciples losing hope as they watch what Jesus predicted would happen. Because what they imagined needed to be in that other corner opposite God is not what they needed most. But the God who is love, and the God who is faithful, and the God who wins every battle, knew that what needed to be in that other corner was sin and death. Everything that goes wrong in this world starts with us rebelling against God as though he is something other than the creator of life, the creator of life, the creator of all things good. When the devil tempted Adam and Eve, what he did was he aimed at their trust that God is loving and faithful and victorious. And what Jesus did was to take our death on hand to hand. What Jesus did was to live the kind of perfect life in the face of threat that we always fall short of. Falling short being the definition of sin. And one thing you can predict, no matter what is in the other corner, in a ring with God, God will win. We need predictable. Jesus delivered predictable. It may be hard to watch because that's the death that predictably comes when you bear the burden of all this world's rebellion. But we're not going to put that last candle out. That last candle is Jesus' life and the promise that he has come to fulfill. It'll disappear for a while, Because all the other hopes fade away. But you can predict what's going to happen. You're going to see that candle disappear behind the altar. I'll say a prayer from back there. You can see it in your bulletin right now. You might as well see it now because you won't be able to see it when all the lights are on. I'm going to say a prayer. There's going to be a moment of suspenseful silence. And then you better be ready for the sound, the strepitus, the sound of that tomb giving up its inhabitants, the rending of the tomb in which Jesus was laid. And I predict that at that moment music will start to play. If the computer works. I predict at that moment music will start to play. And the lights will start to come back on. And the candle will go back on that altar. And after a nice little musical interlude, we're all going to start singing, "Sing my tongue the glorious battle." We just saw what happens when you put God in a ring with everything that makes our lives fall apart. Everything that brings us pain. You put him inside that ring and the battle goes exactly one way. It's the predictable that we need. And I look forward to singing about it with you a few moments from now. Please stand.